I was wondering if people who haven't been here before, if it might be possible for you to just like introduce yourself briefly, tell us a little bit about like how you found us, what interests you about kind of this space, and like what do you see as kind of the most promising in this area, or anything else you might want to share. So I know like Jennifer, you've been obviously very involved in the Discord and the Facebook group. But I wonder if you might say a few words if you're around.
Hey everyone, great to meet you. It's really hard to establish what it means to be an expert on consciousness. So I've been planning this before I took birth even, which is why I went to school for physics and math. And I have a really high understanding of those concepts so that people can have a stepping stone to understanding consciousness, which is extremely a lot harder than even the most abstract things that we're sort of used to conceptualizing, like logic and philosophy and math and that. So I'm here because this is where I want to be, because I really believe in your project for a lot of reasons. Like I could go on, but choice of words, carefulness with the domain that you're approaching. Like a lot of projects, they fail because they're either not specific enough or they're just too broad on their goals.
Mm-hmm.
I love what you're doing, and I think it's an area that I can contribute meaningfully to because there's obviously many motivations for people to do things, and I think I can offer good guidance for like maybe stuff people didn't think about, because I have all this experience with studying consciousness and making models for consciousness and validating various aspects about panpsychism and physics, which I'm happy to go into, but I don't want to kind of take over. I really just want to support your vision and maybe help with the design of experiments if I can. And I hope that is enough of an explanation. And again, really honored to be here and really happy to see what you've put together so far.
Awesome. No, welcome. Thank you. That's those are amazing reasons. Very inspiring. Thank you for being here. Peony, you guys should definitely smell it. It's very, very, very unusual and novel. So smells a little bit like extremely sweet chapstick, bitter almond. But then again, I'm not staying true to the quality core aesthetic, because that's probably not the best way to describe it. But I think like Jennifer wanted to say something.
Yeah, just on this topic, I was wondering if you'd given any thought to using the models that already exist. Like Ayurveda has a basic flavor breakdown of sweet, sour, bitter, astringent, and all that. I haven't really studied this, but I'm aware of some other descriptors like umami as its own category. Have you given any thought to using those or incorporating them at all? Or if you have looked at them, do you feel like your framework right now is possibly adding something to that? And if so, what?
Yeah. No, I think it is very arrogantly. I mean, I think like this kind of a qualia core aesthetic will generate just like strictly more insightful and useful descriptions that are like actually more generalizable, in that like I think if you deeply understand kind of that framework that I'm presenting, and you've trained yourself to recognize those, and they give you then they describe a smell that is kind of like outside of your training set, I think you'll be able to imagine it in a way that is way, way better, or like much more precise and accurate than describing it in terms of its note breakdown. I mean, like just as an example, right? Like I still get incredibly surprised by the actual smell of perfumes, even when I've read a lot about them before. And the thing is, because the notes don't actually cut it, people's descriptions don't really actually cut it. One of the key features of smell that so I have a spreadsheet, and essentially for each aroma chemical, I'm kind of describing them in terms of all of these different features. One kind of set of those is essentially the flavors. So essentially, the taste dimensions. So it is absolutely the case that every scent has a sweetness score and a saltiness score and a bitterness and sourness and umami score. And there's like other dimensions too, but those are absolutely present. But it's not just like a vector, because they're also, each of them have their own attack, decay, sustain, release waveforms. And also they have their different frequencies. So there's like different frequencies of, for example, sweetness. And just as an example, like if you compare, this is for taste qualia. If you compare cane sugar to something like stevia, I mean, like that's a fun, qualia core exercise, is like comparing those two. How do you describe the difference? You're gonna have a very hard time describing it in terms of like pre-existing frameworks, because hey, like they're just sweet. Like it really doesn't got it. But if instead you're describing in terms of the envelope, stevia, for example, I'm not sure if stevia, I might be thinking of aspartame, but each of the artificial sweeteners have like a characteristic curve. And typically, oh yeah, for example, Diet Coke, like aspartame, you will notice that like the sweetness takes longer to heat. So like in regular Coke, the sweetness is kind of like right there, whereas like Diet Coke, it kind of like takes a little longer and it lingers. And then the other thing is that the actual phenomenological frequency of it is also slightly different. I think like stevia for me is like higher frequency than cane sugar. So it's the same taste type, but they also have a and a waveform, right? So that is the sort of like a additional information that I think is really helpful.
What do you mean by waveform here?
CD, yeah, the attack, decay, the envelope, attack, decay, sustain, release. And then the from the signal processing point of view, there's also the CDNS breakdown, whereas like if there's something that smells bad, you've got to identify where in the spectrum that dissonance is coming from. How is that arising? Oh, and the last thing is this last thing I'll mention there is essentially you also want to map out the interactions. So for example, pear. If you smell pear, or even like I think like apple, like various like apple, like artificial flavors, but pear in particular, honeydew melon also has these. There's this very, very strange qualia pattern that I identify in all of those, which is essentially there's like sweetness and sour are trying to be pushed together with as much pressure as possible and try to be turned into one thing, but they never actually turn into one thing, because they're incompatible. So it's kind of like putting, I don't know, like there's kind of like a pressure that emerges and push and tug from sweet and sour in all of those smells. So like that, it's not only there's a vector, there's also interactions between them, and that also needs to be captured in the model. So anyway, that's just like a little window into it. This is, yeah. I will probably like write an article specifically about the state space of scent with all of the arguments and all the data that I've collected so far. Okay, so Jennifer.
Thanks so much. And this has been a great chat. I'm super excited about this and learned a lot on this, made some great notes, and looking forward to sharing my ideas. Just wondering, okay, so you said quantum coherence is a boundary. I think that's valid. I've described it as a non-trivial photon waveform being the boundary separating life and non-life. So everything has a photon waveform, but only life has a non-trivial photon waveform.
Mm-hmm.
And I was wondering if you were thinking of defining coherence as the components of impedance.
I mean, I think maybe, yeah. The critical thing is getting an objective boundary, or like out of that process. And I'm very open of like there being like many physical processes that actually generate topological boundaries. But to kind of find like very promising, I think like that is kind of the key criteria. Can we find like a way in which this like generates a boundary that carves nature at these joints, if that makes sense? Or maybe you can tell me a little bit more. What do you mean by the process of impedance?
Well, it sounded based on your description based on your research, that this impedance factor was non-trivial in its operation on the system. And it was cited as the reason that we don't interact in a way that we can perceive with every single electromagnetic field.
Yeah.
And so I was wondering, I guess, if you were considering breaking down impedance into several components that might be somehow either directly or indirectly measurable experimentally.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
I guess
thing that
making impedance somehow part of the boundary, because the way I'm looking at it is you're never going to find an actual boundary, because in non-dualism, boundaries are evolving, but they're always evolving within a very small range. So it makes sense to model as a boundary sometimes within particular regimes until you state transition and so on and so on. So, yeah.
Well, I mean, a topological boundary in the electromagnetic field can be macroscopic, and like I think that's like the very exciting thing. That like if you look at the sun and like the huge plasma cells, they actually trap plasma tubes, and I think like even like magnetic reconnection and the aurora borealis, they're all topological effects. So the claim is that very likely, like at the level of the electromagnetic field, there is like an actual topological pocket that is macroscopic and robust that might span maybe not the entire brain, but like a very huge percentage of the brain, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks so much for taking the time to answer my question. Look forward to the next one.
Fantastic. Anybody else? Scribe, yes.
There we go. So kind of just curious, like what degree you believe p-zombies are possible to, and like what, I mean, we're seeing a lot of stuff already with language models, and I've seen some of the things that you've said about that, and the Google engineer guy, his claims and all that. So yeah, just kind of curious what is the most real p-zombie that could possibly exist, or just whatever you say about that.
Yeah. I mean, it's I'll mention two things about this. One is an analogy, and then the other is kind of sociological prediction. I mean, the sociological prediction is that people will be very confused in the future because there's going to be like a lot of algorithms that are like very compelling, like they seem like they're like people, like, and you talk to them and they keep track of information and they might give you like helpful suggestions, and that's one thing. In addition, something like 20% of people will want to believe that they're talking to something that is conscious. Like there's actually like a wishful thinking or like desire for it to be conscious, because you feel silly if you fall in love with your like Google Assistant, but it's actually not conscious, right? So there's going to be a lot of motivated reasoning to want to believe that it is conscious.